I just bought another money pit, and this Mercedes came straight from the auction. It might look okay from the outside, but there's always a reason why things go to the auction. You guys see, I have never bought in a car from the auction before. And when I was working my 9-to-5 job, I found this beautiful Mercedes that looked absolutely flawless from the outside, but I knew that there was a reason why it's there. In the listing, it said that this car ran and drove on its own power. I have then realized that auctions can lie. So welcome to the family, the 2010 GLK 350. But firstly, let's find out how exactly I found the car on the auction site. It was a typical workday for me as I stumbled across this beautiful Mercedes. I knew I had to go check it out. So I rushed to the auction, checked it out, and it looked way better than I thought it would, until I started the engine. Absolutely closing my eyes on the red flags, I started bidding the following day.
3, 2,
And then just spend it
1. Closed.
Yeah.
I won.
Yeah.
Probably got scammed. Yay.
The main reason why I bought this GLK is to actually work on one of my other cars. If you guys are new to the channel and haven't seen my previous videos, I do have another S-Class, which I absolutely love and adore, and I need time and money to fix that car. But while that car is getting fixed, I do need a runaround car for my personal errands and also for parts for the other car. Which is exactly why a long car with a lot of space in the trunk will actually really benefit the situation. This GLK comes with a V6 that is naturally aspirated, and it's a 3.5 liter V6, and these engines are actually really reliable. Well, like all German cars, they do have their own common problems, but this one doesn't have a lot. I did want to get something that I could actually take this car on a long trip on, not absolutely drain my bank account because gas is too expensive for it. So I wanted it to be a little bit family friendly, but also pretty powerful and fun. The interior of the car is nothing fancy, but it does have a few little quirks here and there. It does have a panoramic roof that lets a lot of light in, a very good sound system, and all the Mercedes comfort features, which I got for a very good price. Even though it's not the most luxurious one you could get, for example, like an S-Class, it does still feel like a very luxurious Mercedes for a family. Or, in my case, a hauler for the other S-Class. I can pretty much fully fit in this back trunk with all of the seats down. So this will definitely allow me to carry a lot of parts and bumpers in the back seat if I do have to. Before buying the car, I obviously did a Carfax report on it, and I found out that this is actually a one-owner vehicle. This car has 214,000 kilometers, and it was mostly serviced at the dealer. To be honest with you guys, I was actually shocked that this car was on the auction. It's a one-owner vehicle, it doesn't have too many kilometers on it, and it ran and drove. Until I started the engine. I really hope the microphone picked up those weird sounds that the engine is making. When I first started the engine, I thought it was some kind of a timing chain issue. I heard a little bit of a rattle, a lot of squeaking happening at the same time, so I got really worried. But once the engine warmed up, the noises kind of went away and it sounded very normal. Now, it could still mean that it could be a timing chain issue still. Once the engine warms up and the oil flows a little bit more around the chain, it does reduce its noise, but it doesn't mean that a guide couldn't be broken or anything like that. Otherwise, the car drives fine, it runs okay, the heating and the AC works, and everything about it works perfectly fine. But if this is a timing chain issue, this could be one of the reasons why this car was at the auction, unless the dealer somehow messed up and potentially just told the customers that they needed a brand new engine, when in reality, it could be something very little. So I've decided to take a big risk on myself. We are about to take this car to a Mercedes-Benz certified shop. I've been taking my S-Class there for about a while now, and I absolutely love their service. I think they're absolutely perfect, and I want them to diagnose this car and tell me everything that is wrong with it, and we're gonna find out how much of a money pit this is. At the end of the video, I'm going to do a price breakdown of how much this car costed me from the auction with fees and everything. I'm always transparent with you guys, and how much it's actually going to cost me to actually fix it from the shop. As long as they don't tell me I need a brand new engine, I think I could make a little bit of money of this after I drive it for a few months and after I fix the S-Class, but we'll have to see. As long as the shop doesn't tell me I need a brand new engine and this is a complete money pit, which it might be, but I have high hopes for this, and I'm going to try my best to do everything DIY to save the maximum amount of money. Now, let's head to the shop and see what my faith is. If you guys do own a Mercedes in Calgary, take it to Continental, as they always work on very cool cars, including this V12 from Japan. The team here is very knowledgeable, they will always give you a fair price, and they will always do the job right from the start. As we jacked up the GLK, we started looking at the exhaust and realized that there are cracks and corrosion that will definitely need to be addressed. There is an oil leak coming from the top of the engine, which is dripping down on the belt, but that is coming from the oil cooler housing. We then moved on to the suspension, and surprisingly, they are looking okay. They're definitely tired, but they look okay. The technician then looked into the coolant housing, and it definitely looks okay from here, but when you look at the walls of the inside of it, there's definitely some oil on it, which is not a good sign. Let's head back to the garage and see how fast I can max out my credit card. All right, we're back from the garage. Now we're going to talk about the quote that they gave me to fix the GLK, and also how much did I buy the car for. But before we do that, we need to move the S-Class out of the way. And it's been sitting here for about a week and a half. The air suspension is fully collapsed, and I haven't done a cold start for a while. So let's hear how that sounds. Okay, now the part that you guys have all been waiting for. This car costed me $7,765 with all the taxes and all the fees from the auction. When I first purchased this car, I actually thought it was really worth it. It came with a pretty decent body, it came with a good color, and I thought that I'll be able to fix it for fairly cheap and actually just resell it for maybe quite a bit and actually enjoy it. After I took it to the shop, I kind of changed my mind on that, and if I break even, that would be lucky. This car, with approximately 200,000 kilometers and a very good body that was decently maintained, has a market value of about $12,000 Canadian. When I actually won the car, I actually thought it was a bargain. I thought I was going to put about $1,000 into it and maybe resell it for $12,000, get a little bit of profit from it. I don't think that's the case. The first issue is the secondary air injection pump. This is the pump that is making a lot of noise at startup, the one that screams. Is going to cost me about $200, and I can really easily change this. I think it's at the very top of the engine. I don't have to jack anything up, so let's add that to the tally. The next big issue is the oil filter housing and also the oil cooler housing. Because of those oil leaks, they're actually leaking down onto the drive belt and also some of the accessories. So they recommend me to actually clean the accessories up and change the drive belt, which is going to cost me another $800 plus GST. Both of the gaskets are leaking, and to fix all of those costs me $900 plus GST from the shop. There is an exhaust clamp and the actual exhausts that are way too corroded, so there are cracks. And to fix those, you actually just need to weld it, which costs about $700 plus GST from the shop. Now, there is an oil cooler gasket leak as well, which is internal inside the cooler itself. That gasket is responsible for splitting the oil and the coolant and to make sure that they're both cooled individually. But I think that gasket is cracked and the oil is actually getting into the coolant a little bit. So the technicians found a little bit of oil in the coolant compartment, but they're saying it's nothing serious yet. I could simply just do a normal flush and it should be okay. So we'll need to address that as well. And to do a whole entire coolant flush and make sure that all the components are okay, it'll probably take me about $300 plus GST. The front brakes are absolutely destroyed. There's about 3 milliliters of brakes left in the front. The rears were done recently, they said, but they didn't do the front for some reason. And the rotor has such a big lip that both rotors and pads need to be replaced. And all of that is going to cost $950 plus GST. Our arm blade is broken and they're wanting $210 plus GST to fix this. The engine mounts are also pretty destroyed. There's a lot of vibration that goes through the whole entire car. And apparently it's a huge job because it costs $2,200 plus GST, and apparently it's a 10-hour job. There's a few other issues that they recommend me changing, which are not mandatory, they're just suggestions. I do have a few lights out. I have front suspension components, which cost over $1,000 to change, but they're pretty okay, they said. That's just like if I want to make the car perfect, I should probably change them. Now you guys see the whole entire total of how much this car would cost me if I do fix all of the issues from the shop. I am going to try to do everything by myself and see how much money I can actually save and see if I can make a little bit of profit out of it. But this price does not include the body work. There are a few dents around the car that I do want to address and also polish the car, and I do want to put a ceramic coating on it so the next owner has a pretty pristine car. Today we'll be installing all of these parts that the dealership wanted to charge over $7,000. But we're going to do that for a fraction of that price, assuming I can do all of this myself. Also installing the engine mounts on this car, and apparently it's a 10-hour job on these vehicles. I'm going to try doing it much quicker and alone in my personal garage. Now, just as a reminder, we have bought this GLK for $7,765 with all the auction fees and taxes, but that is not including any of the work that I'm about to do. This car is only going to be a deal if I do everything myself. I cannot afford taking it to a mechanic shop or the dealership to do any of the fixes because I'm getting very close to the market value of what this vehicle is worth, and I want to make a little bit of money for it and also enjoy it. So in this video, we're going to do all of the mechanical things that I've bought in for the car. And at the end of the video, I'm going to do a full price breakdown of how much money I'm actually into it. The car is already in service mode, so let's start jacking up the car and getting to work. Firstly, we're going to start loosening up all of the lug nuts before we raise up the car. The front of the Mercedes usually has a front jacking point. When it comes to the rear, I usually just raise it from the rear differential, as that is the easiest way to raise the car. If you have small jack stands like I do, you can just put pieces of wood underneath the jack stand and that will give you a little bit more height. All right, we're gonna start off by draining all of the fluids, but before we do that, I would like to use this engine and transmission flush. I'm gonna put this in the engine and run the vehicle for about 10 to 15 minutes. I like to use something like this every time I buy a brand new car because I don't know the history of it. I don't know when the last oil change was. So I want to make sure that the engine is nice and clean before I put brand new oil in. I also like to use this once every 3 oil changes. It's super good. It doesn't harm absolutely anything. Just make sure you don't drive the car on this and it just idles and sits in one spot for about 10 to 15 minutes. And make sure you just drain the oil right after and it's going to be absolutely flawless. Everything I use in this video is going to be down in the description below. I have literally just started the engine and I got a check engine light. So while that's idling, we're gonna scan the car with a Carly and see what code it has. Hopefully I don't have to buy anything else. Now, I'm not sponsored by Carly, but this is a great tool for anyone who's either starting to work on cars or who already has a lot of experience with cars. A Carly scans all of the computers in a very deeply format and not just give you some general codes. And it even recommends different ways and solutions to actually solve the problem you're having with your car. I'm not even joking. I've just restarted the car. I didn't even clear the code. And the check engine light is gone and it runs smooth again. I think I have a theory of why that happened. The oil has been leaking onto the belt for a while now. And I think it's startup. The belt slipped in the alternator and it didn't produce enough voltage. So it gave a voltage fault. So I think it's all good because now it's running absolutely flawlessly. So we are going to change the belt, change all the accessories, and hopefully the code will never come back. Because this is a German car, it obviously has a lot of beauty covers to cover up a simple drain plug. I always get really scared taking the beauty covers off because it always reveals oil leaks. So I pray to God that cars don't leak any oil, but this car is unfortunately no different and obviously has a lot of leaks. This is another scary moment of mine, and that is draining the actual oil, especially for a brand new car because I don't know the history of it and I hope to God that there's no glitters or any shiny particles in the oil. But this oil surprisingly looks very good and kind of new. All right, while the engine oil is draining, I'm going to explain to you what my game plan is because we do have a lot of parts that we have to change and I want to make sure that I'm executing in the most efficient way. So my first thing I'm going to be changing is going to be the engine mount. I'm going to be removing pretty much anything that is in the engine mount's way because it is a 10-hour job and I want to make it as easy as myself as possible. So I'm going to take all the accessories off. I'm going to take the belt off. I'm going to take the cooler housing off just so I have the most amount of space. So once I get to the engine mounts, I'm going to take the old ones out, put the new one in, and then replace all the parts that I took off. And then we'll get onto the brakes and the transmission right after. Surprise, surprise, there are more beauty covers at the top of the engine. Taking them off is very easy though. They are just clipped on by clips and you can simply just pull up on everything and it will just come off nice and smoothly. This then reveals access to the actual serpentine belt tensioner. It just requires a 21 mil put on it and then pulled by a breaker bar that relieves a lot of tension, and you can just simply slide out the serpentine belt with ease. Good thing we're actually changing the belt because this one has a lot of engine oil and coolant on it, which will just slip the accessory, so good thing we're changing it. The secondary air injection pump is right at the top of the engine, so I can just access it with ease. I'm going to use penetrating fluid on all the bolts just in case they're seized, and the reason why I'm changing it is because it sounded like this before. You simply just have to take a few bolts off with the bracket that holds on to the secondary air injection pump. After you unplug all of the hoses and the electrical, it should just slide out. There are total 4 bolts that hold on the bracket to the actual engine, which are 3 at the bottom and then 1 at the very top. Now it's just a game of putting a new one on. It's super simple. You simply just have to transfer the bracket over to the new one and put all the hoses on, and just make sure that the electrical connector is all ready to be connected whenever you're putting it back on. The next step is taking all of the other accessories off. There are 2 idler pulleys and 1 serpentine belt tensioner that we have to take off. Good thing that we're taking them off because they are very easy and they're very oily, so this is not good. The serpentine belt tensioner is a little finicky at times because when the tension is on it, it might be blocking one of the bolts on. So you have to make sure that the tension is on the tensioner and you're actually taking it off at the same time. You can put a little screwdriver in one of the slots that it makes, but it is a bit finicky, so just play around with it. Now let's move on to one of the easiest jobs you can do in a car, which is changing the spark plugs. Dealerships absolutely love changing spark plugs because they can charge you close to $1,000 to change 6 spark plugs, but it's only going to take them 15 minutes to actually do it. The coil is responsible to igniting the fuel and the air mixture inside the combustion chamber. It does that by sending a current through the coil into the spark plug. The coil only ignites the spark plug at a very specific time when the piston is at the very top of the engine to make sure that the fuel is compressed as much as possible. The spark plug can misfire if the spark plug is very old, which deactivates the cylinder. Which is why the computer will tell you that you have a misfire at a certain cylinder. Changing these are very easy. You simply just have to put a socket through the spark plug and they will look something like this when they come out. This one is actually not too bad, but it's still a good thing that we are changing all of them. All right, the next thing is going to be the alternator. But before we do that, let's go back to our board and see how much money we have spent on this build so far. All right, so we have spent a total of $7,765 on the actual car. Now let's talk about how much did the parts cost. All right, so for all the parts that we have bought, we have spent $1,685.14 so far. So in total, we are at $9,450.14. We are getting very close to that market value of the car. So we will need to make sure that all of our cosmetics and internal components will be done very cheaply. Doing things very cheaply moving forward with this car is going to be a little bit of a struggle because of the amount of problems I run into later in the video. Now it's time to remove the alternator, which is located on the passenger side at the bottom of the engine. The frame of the vehicle is right there, so it's very hard to fit any wrenches or anything like that to actually take the bolt out. But once you do take it out, it will come out, and then you simply just have to unplug all the electrical connectors and it should just slide out. Definitely do not let the time lapse fool you because this job took pretty much an hour just to take the alternator out because of how finicky it was. That is pretty much the last part that I need to take out when it comes from the front of the engine side of things. Moving to the back, the first thing we have to take off is the exhaust. And taking it off is not easy because this car has 220,000 kilometers on it. And the first thing I do is spray penetrating fluid pretty much everywhere because I have to take O2 sensors out and also the flange bolts. This was also the first look I got at the flange bolts and the O2 sensors that I'll have to take off, and I was definitely intimidated because I never really took an exhaust out before. But this is what I'm doing this for, is to learn new things, and hopefully this one is not going to give me a lot of struggle. They probably will give me a lot of trouble, but we'll cross the bridge when we get there. At least for now, I can reach the flange bolts with ease because I can just put a couple of extension wrenches on it and they're actually pretty accessible. They definitely sound weird when taking them out. In Calgary, we get quite a bit of salt in the winter, so these came out very easily for that, which was very surprising to me. But just make sure that you're patient and you go slow, and they should come out with ease. Now we have to move on to the O2 sensors, another hard part. There are two on each side of the exhaust system, one in front of the catalytic converters and one on the catalytic converters. The driver's side ones are connected right beside the driver's side exhaust system. When it comes to the passenger side, the orientation of the O2 sensors is identical, but I do not know where the electrical goes to. So for now, we will just leave this side. As always, we have to submerge all of the O2 sensors and anything we have to take off that is exhaust related with penetrating fluid. If we do not do this, things will strip and it's going to be a long day. I decided to start with the passenger side ones, and I'm trying to fit a breaker bar on one of the O2 sensors, and I actually managed to do it because I couldn't loosen it up with a wrench. And once you do loosen it up, I used one of these OEM tools to just kind of give me a bit more leverage to spin the O2 sensor out. And once it does come out, just make sure you store it above the prop shaft and know the orientation of the O2 sensors, as there are two, and if you do mix them up, it might throw a check engine light and it will definitely not make the vehicle run well. Now, moving to the rear of the exhaust system, I'm not going to take out the whole entire exhaust system as I can simply just loosen up these clamps. But if I do loosen them up, I do have to drop the exhaust down, and there is a brace that is in the way, unfortunately. So we will start taking the brace off that is secured by 4 bolts going into the car. The brace does span across the whole entire width of the car, so we do have to loosen up the plastic covers that are on each side of the exhaust system so we can reach the far bolts. Make sure you guys are wearing some kind of eye protection because there's a lot of dirt that builds up on these plastic covers, and when you do loosen them up, they do just splash your face with a lot of dirt. Make sure you're always using penetrating fluid, especially on bolts that are 220,000 kilometers old. I even tried using my legs on one of the bolts and it still couldn't loosen up. So then I went to the store and bought myself a 3/8 breaker bar. I was really hoping that this would get that one bolt out because all the other 3 ones came out with ease, except for this one. But unfortunately, I ran into another issue. It still wouldn't come off, and I was honestly pretty defeated at this point because without taking the brace off, I don't think I can take the exhaust out. So for now, I need some time to think about my next moves with the exhaust system. So for now, I'm going to move on to the braking system of the car. I am changing all of the pads and rotors on the car, which is why I'm taking them off, but if you're just doing the engine mounts, you do not need to do this. We do need to take the front axles out of the front differential because it does prevent us from raising the engine with the axles as it hits the top part of the frame. So by loosening up the caliper, it actually gives us a bit more space to work around and loosen up the bolts. Good thing we're also changing up the brake pads because these were definitely at like 5%. We can then remove the caliper bracket off so we have access to take the rotor off, but the rotor unfortunately had some other plans. No matter how many times I kicked it or hammered it, it just wouldn't budge. So I needed to come up with a better solution. I then had to go to the store again and buy myself a threaded nut and a bolt so I can use one of the holes on the knuckle. And I'm trying to thread the bolt into the nut and eventually push the rotor off that way without hammering anything, because I was changing the rotor at 1 a.m. and it did not want to make any noise. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense and you guys can see what I'm trying to do here. And the reason why I'm using the big wrench is to actually distribute the load across the full length of the rotor, so there's a higher chance of it popping off.
Yes. Oh, success!
I then decided to go back to that brace that I was trying to take off with my legs and bought an extractor tool. This tool definitely gave me quite a bit of hope. And the only thing you have to do is drill a small hole through the bolt you're trying to take off and fit the largest extractor tool through it. But I wish it was that easy.
Oh my god.
Yup, the tool literally just snapped in half. I then decided to just move on to the exhaust and try taking it off with the brace on. So I started drilling through one of the clamps because they rusted out. But unfortunately, I had no success with that either. I was definitely stumped and stuck and was about to give up. But we do not give up here. We're gonna try everything until we can actually succeed. I decided to start taking off the left side of the exhaust off because the clamp actually didn't snap there. I grabbed a small jack stand with a little piece of wood to actually raise the front side of the exhaust off. If you guys do have somebody to help you out, that would be beneficial because the exhaust is actually really heavy. And it actually worked. I actually succeeded to slide the exhaust back on top of the resonator because there was a bit of space, and just slide down the exhaust with the brace on. Now I'm going to try doing the exact same thing with the right one, take the last O2 sensor off, and hopefully try ripping it out from the broken clamp. I was able to take the left side exhaust off the driver's side one, but this is the one that has the snap bolt from the side, and I'm not actually able to disconnect it. I could spin it, but because of the shape of the exhaust, it kind of like goes outwards. The clamp, I think, is holding it on. So I need to angle grind this and then kind of like split them apart. So hopefully then I can just rip the exhaust out. And I was able to do it with the brace on because I cannot take one of the bolts off. So I think that's my next step. All right, seems like the only way to take off this clamp from the other side of the exhaust is using an angle grinder. This solves everything, right? I've never actually used one of these before, so this is my first time of doing it. This is why I love doing something like this, is because it gives me the opportunity to actually learn how to use new tools and how to use them safely. So I'm obviously going to be using safety glasses and some gloves. I did try looking for some hearing protection as well. So if you guys are going to use this for the first time ever, make sure you have some hearing protection as well, because this stuff gets very loud apparently when you are grinding metal, which does make sense. But I have a very small clamp that I'm just cutting up, so I think I should be okay for now. Sweet. This was much quicker than using a screwdriver. Now the clamp popped off, so now I can definitely pop the exhaust off with ease. And now we have all the access in the world for those engine mounts. The exhaust really covers a lot of space in it, so it's important to take it off. But before we do any work on the engine mounts, it's time to pop that axle out of the hub so we can raise the engine and not let those axles block the way. We're going to start by removing the side bolts of the engine mount that are attached to the frame of the vehicle. You can reach both of those bolts from the top of the car with just a few extensions, and I believe it's a 17 mil that you need to use. It's pretty easy, it's pretty accessible. There are 3 heat shields that are covering the engine mounts and this prop shaft on the passenger side. They are secured with just 3 bolts each. They're super accessible, really easy to take off. Just make sure you spray them with penetrating fluid because there might be quite a bit of dirt and corrosion on them. And as always, when you're working on a car, you're going to find more problems with it. So the back of the engine, I found this black vacuum part that I will need to change that I believe is leaking some oil. So I'm just going to buy that real quick and change it while we're here. But now that the mounts are free, we can actually fit one of the tools that I bought from Amazon that acts as an extension to actually fit in a bunch of extensions on the top side of the engine so we can loosen up the top bolt that is holding the engine mount to the car. From all of the research that I've done, it seems like this tool is probably one of the most important tools to actually remove the engine mounts with ease. I found this tool very difficult and aggravating because it's super hard to fit it on the actual bolt. And unfortunately, this tool was not cooperating in any shape or form. Things kept slipping out and eventually I did lose my patience. Alright, as always, we ran into another issue. I cannot take the top bolt out of the mount off as there's no space. It's right below the exhaust manifold, and I got the bolt loose using this tool that I bought from Amazon, but I cannot fully take it off. I watched a few videos, and it seems like most people can just take it off by hand right when they loosen it, but mine is still super tight, and I cannot fit the tool back onto it. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to take off the bolts that are attaching the engine mount to this mount to the engine block. And there's 4 of them. There's one there, one at the bottom, I'm not sure if you guys can see it, and one on the other side, which I think I can still get to from the very top. So let's take that off and hopefully I can pivot all of this kind of down so I have more access to that bolt and then I could just like spin it off by hand. And once again, I was wrong. I cannot reach half the bolts that are attached to the engine block. So I decided to take the inner lining off so I can fit a few extensions and reach through it. But that unlocked a bunch of other issues. The frame was blocking access to those bolts, and no matter how many extensions I used, no matter how many swivel heads I used, I still couldn't manage to take some of the bolts out. So I needed to come up with a better solution. Alright, well, that didn't work out either. There's absolutely no space when I took the lining off because of the frame of the car. This tool is only good to loosen up the bolt, but constantly putting it back and then finding space to actually untighten the bolt is really difficult. So I bought in this tool. It's a flex head wrench that kind of pivots in 180 degrees. And my idea is to actually put it underneath the manifold and kind of do that because that's all the space that I have, and then have hopefully enough space to actually twist it off. I'm not sure if the distance between the bolt and the frame of the car is kind of similar to the wrench. Hopefully you can reach it, but if not, I don't know what I'm going to do. But let's try this out. This is pretty much my last resort. I was tired of coming up with new ideas to get the engine mounts off, and I was about to send this to the dealership, but I knew I couldn't afford it if I do want to make some money from it. So I just kept trying something, and the bolt was actually really tight on, and I still couldn't have enough leverage to take it off. So I put the tool back on, tried using even a breaker bar to loosen it, and it seemed to loosen it up a little bit more, which was awesome. So then I tried putting the wrench back on it, and hopefully I would have enough leverage to spin it out now. Oh my god, I think it's spinning. Is it? Did I strip it? Oh my god! I think it's actually spinning. I think it's actually coming off. And I know that this is just a bolt that I'm trying to take off from the engine mount, but when you're trying to take a bolt off for 3 days and you're losing hope in getting this car back on the road, it definitely makes you happy that it starts spinning. I think it's a car guy thing. Oh, I got it! Okay, let's go take it out. Taking off the driver's side engine mount is probably the harder side out of the two, and you only can take the driver's side off from the bottom of the car. I finally got it out! Yay! Here's the old one, and here's the new one. See, there is a little bit of a height difference, which is good because these are OEM, and they are from 2009. So that's perfect. We're gonna put these ones in. But because these are actually bigger, I actually think I'm gonna struggle even more with these, putting them back in, because they're bigger in size, so it's harder to fit through it. But let's see how that works out. Okay, so from what I've researched, this pin right here is the indication of how the mount is supposed to go back on, and it is supposed to be facing out the outside of the car, so like towards the wheel. So I need to put it on the driver's side like that. And to be honest, I did run into a big issue of fitting the new mount in, especially with the axle still in place. I thought I could still take it out with the axle on, but I was definitely wrong. You guys have already seen me taking the axle out from the other side, but you just have to take the rotor off, you still gotta take the caliper off, so you have access to these strut bolts that you have to loosen up, and then you go underneath the car and start beating on the axle until it pops off like that. And the driver one is finally completed, definitely the harder side out of the two. Before we move on to the passenger side of the engine mounts, please hit that subscribe button and like and share with your friends and family. It helps me out more than you think, and it will help me continue making these videos for you guys. Now, the passenger side is a bit easier than the driver's side. The only thing different that we have to do is modify the tool and make it a bit smaller because it doesn't fit underneath the manifold. And yes, I'm wearing a motorcycle helmet to reduce the noise a little bit. And motorcycle content will be coming soon on the channel. As you can see, I only had to remove a very little bit and then it fits perfectly onto that engine mount. I then simply just use a breaker bar to loosen up the bolt and use the exact same wrench I used on the driver's side to take the bolt off completely. The last thing I want to do is to remove and change the transmission mount. I usually like doing engine mounts with transmission mounts in pairs just to get a brand new feel towards the car. It is located right above the black brace that is right behind the transmission. Make sure to never take in your car for a transmission mount change to a dealership because they will charge you close to the $1,000 mark again, and this job is very easy. I'm pretty sure it took me 10 minutes. The only thing you have to do is simply just raise up the transmission a little bit with a wooden plank just so you can hold it in place while you take the brace off, take the transmission mount off, and then put a new one on and then put all the bolts back in, and that's it. And you just saved yourself $1,000. Whenever you're putting the transmission mount back on, just make sure you're torquing it correctly and following the torque specs because this is a transmission. It definitely holds your transmission up, especially whenever you're shifting. So you need to make sure that it is tightly in place. But once you do that, you can lower the jack and voila, you're done. And here are pretty much all of the parts I had to take off just to replace the engine mounts. All right, the first steps are going to be putting the axles back into the front differential, and we'll start doing the brakes so we can just get rid of the suspension part of things. Putting the axle back in was definitely much easier than taking it out because I didn't have to beat on it like last time. The only thing you have to do is put the axle into the front differential. Just make sure you put quite a bit of grease in it so it slides in a bit smoother. It's going to be hard to put the axle fully into the front differential because the spindle is still hanging. But once you put those strut bolts in, it will go in fully. Now you can do the exact same thing on the other side of the car before putting on the brake rotors and the brake calipers and the whole entire braking system. And make sure you follow the appropriate steps to torquing the strut to the spindle, because if this falls or if this is loose, it's going to be very problematic on the road. Taking the brake rotors off last time was a huge problem. So when I'm going to put the new ones on, I'm definitely going to put some anti-seize on it so the next person is not going to struggle as much as I did. Now, putting the braking system is actually not that difficult. You just have to make sure you clean everything and you put brake clean on pretty much everything, just because there's lots of dust that gets built up around these areas. Most cars actually have a very similar braking system to every other car. There is a braking bracket that I'm cleaning and putting new clips on right now that attaches to the spindle, and then the braking caliper just simply gets attached to that bracket. Before putting the caliper on, it is very easy to simply just put the brake pads into the bracket and then slide the caliper over the braking pads. Just make sure you put some anti-seize on it so it's not as squeaky and it's also easy to take out the next time you're going to change the pads. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. If your calipers are not compressing, you can use a C-clamp to compress them and then it will easily slide over the brake pads. It's definitely nice seeing the car being put back together. Now we're just simply going to put the inner linings back in because we did try taking them out to remove the engine mounts with these and it did not work, so we're just going to put them back in. Now it's time for the alternator. In the last episode, I definitely struggled taking this out because of how heavy the alternator is. Putting it back in, I should have gravity on my side, but that might cause some more problems. There are two main issues that I ran into putting the alternator back into the tight space. One is the tight space. It is almost impossible to fit a wrench there to actually put the bolt in. Which then leads to the second issue, and that is how heavy the alternator is. I literally had to hold the alternator with one hand and put the bolts in with the other hand, just so they can actually go through the alternator into the engine. Make sure you guys have a lot of patience for this job. But unfortunately, the smooth sailing had to stop somewhere. Me and my girlfriend Elisa had a plan to go on an amazing trip. And I was supposed to take the S-Class to the trip, but this is what I came to. That's right, a blown out air strut. And our trip, of course, was the next day. So I had one day to put the car back together because I did not have enough time to order a new strut and put it into the S-Class. So we have to work quick. So the next step is going to be putting the heat shield onto the prop shaft and the engine mount. And this wasn't super difficult, but there were a few bolts that were just in a tight space, so it's hard to fit wrenches in it. And now it's time to change the positive crankcase ventilation PVC valve. This was leaking at the back of the engine as we found it from the last episode, so it's time to just clean that up and change it into a new part. It's definitely a tight space, but you can take it out, clean the area up, and then just put the new one in. And this is how it looks like from the top.
It's a push start, I don't need a car key.
And now it's time to move to the front of the engine and start putting things back together then. But before we proceed, we gotta drain the coolant because we are changing the oil filter cooling housing, and that obviously has coolant running through it. To drain the coolant from the radiator is pretty easy. We just have to take a couple of bolts out from these beauty covers, and then there's literally a valve that you simply just spin, and the coolant will slowly start dripping through it. Just make sure you open up the coolant housing tank, and it will drip a little bit faster. The coolant will take a little bit of time to drain. In the meantime, I'm going to put the new spark plugs into the engine. We're also going to remove the oil filter from the housing because we do have to remove the housing. And just a reminder, the reason why we're changing and taking the housing off is because the technician that was looking at the car saw oil inside the coolant tank. And the reason that happened is because inside the oil cooler housing, there is a seal that separates coolant from oil. And if that seal cracks, they will mix together, and that's exactly what's happening in this case. But good thing we found the problem early because the coolant did not go into the engine oil, so the engine is actually really good. To get more access, we need to remove the top radiator hose, which connects to the thermostat of the engine. To remove that is just 2 bolts, and simply just move it out of the way, and we have more access to the oil filter housing. The next step is to remove 8 bolts that hold the oil filter housing in place. Make sure you have a bucket underneath the car because this is what happens when you loosen it up. And now it's just a matter of separating the oil filter from the cooling housing. There are just 4 bolts holding the housing onto the oil filter. Simply just separate that, and there's going to be another seal behind it. Taking the gasket out might be a little difficult because it gets super brittle, but you simply just have to jam a small screwdriver in and it will easily take it out. The housing has been leaking for a while now, so make sure you clean it up before putting it back in. And once it gets fully cleaned, we can finally put the new gaskets in. This is also a great chance to clean the front of the engine without any accessories or the housing on because everything is just open. And now it's finally time to put the oil filter back in with the new gaskets. There are 8 bolts holding it on, so just make sure you remember where they went back in. The engine is finally looking more like an engine now with all the pieces back in it. I have put all the accessories back on, and now it's the serpentine belt time. We are still really far from getting it done, and it is already like 11 p.m. at night. But I must finish the car before our trip for tomorrow. And now it's time for the secondary air injection pump. It's right at the very top of the engine, so it's pretty easy to put on. There are 4 bolts holding it in, and we can simply just adjust the serpentine belt to make sure that it's on the pulleys correctly. Now you know you're at the finish line when you're starting to put fluids back into the car. This car takes about 5 liters of coolant after you drain the radiator out and 8.5 liters of 05W40 oil. And of course I'm using AMSOIL for my cars because this is the best oil for cars in my personal opinion, and I absolutely love it. And you guys can find the oil down in the description below if you guys do want it. Now it's finally time for the exhaust. I did have to buy brand new clamps for the rear part of the exhaust because I did snap them in half and they were super corroded. And we're going to put that into our tally to see how much money I'm into this car right at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. The exhausts are very heavy, especially when there's two of them from each side. So make sure you guys have somebody helping you out to at least hold them from one end. I somehow managed to do it by myself, but I was really motivated because it was already 1 a.m. and I wanted to go home. Do not forget to plug the O2 sensors back into their appropriate slots and tighten all the bolts according to the specifications because of the exhaust falls. It's going to be very problematic. And I had to make sure that I put all the other bolts for the brace on and tighten all of the plastic parts around it. And here are the new clamps that I also got for the exhaust. All right, it's 1:30 a.m. and I have work at 8 a.m. So I really need to get home, but I want to finish the car just because of my trip coming up tomorrow. So the only thing we have left to do is put the beauty covers on, put the engine filters back on, and start the car. Hopefully there's going to be no leaks and no issues, and it'll just start and it'll be all good. So let's finish up with that and start this thing up. But as promised, I'm going to do price breakdown before we proceed. All right, so we did have to buy a few more things. So our total is going to change a little bit. We did find that oil leak at the back of the engine, so we had to buy the black part, and we also had to buy the exhaust clamps. Both of the clamps ended up being $68.32 when the valve was $45.95, which brings our total to $9,564.41. Now it's time for the final part of the build, which are the engine air filters. They're located right on top of the engine with just the clip that I took off, and they're on each side of the intake. These were actually surprisingly very clean, so I think they were changed pretty recently, but this was a dealer-maintained car, so I'm not surprised that they're actually pretty good. But I'm still going to put some new ones on because it's such cheap maintenance, and I just want to make sure that the car is perfect for a while for me. Putting the air intake on the top of the engine is super easy. You simply just press it down and it'll clip on. Make sure you put all the hoses on, and it's ready for our first start. The car ran absolutely perfectly. There's nothing on the dash, there was no weird vibrations or sounds. Now it's just time to put the wheels back on the ground and let's get ready on the road trip. Let's go on the road trip. And that's when I noticed a little bit of an issue. I unfortunately found a leak. Thought I fixed all the possible leaks that I had, and I did, but clearly there's a new one that popped up. You guys won't believe it. The leak is coming from this $5 O-ring. And that leak is unfortunately the power steering fluid. This O-ring is located right underneath the power steering reservoir that is connected to the power steering pump. So in this video, we're going to change that. Hopefully that's going to be the last problem I have with this car, but it's a German car, so we'll see what happens. We also have a few mechanical other parts that we need to work on. Here's the whole entire table of all the parts that I still need to put in. Something that I didn't get a chance to do in the last episode is change the transmission fluid and do a transmission service. So we're going to get to that as well in this video. Before we do, we have to update our board. We only have this $5 O-ring to add to the tally, which is not going to make too much of a difference. But this is not including any of the cosmetic stuff we have to do, and we have a lot of cosmetics to go through. The O-ring was $5.41. So our new total is going to be $9,569.82 for now. We still have a lot of work to do, so let's jack up the car and start getting to work. You guys watched me jack up this car for 3 times now. Hopefully this is the last time. All right, I'm going to start with taking all of the beauty covers off of the car and then giving the beauty covers a clean because fluid has been leaking in them for a couple of days now. And then I'm going to take the power steering reservoir out and remove that O-ring that connects to the power steering pump so we can replace it and hopefully stop the leak. And then we'll move to the transmission service right away. And this is the leak I'm kind of dealing with. It's going on top of the AC compressor, but it seems like it's mostly coming up from the power steering pump, but I do want to verify this. So I'm going to begin by taking off all of the beauty covers. Once again, there's like 20 bolts holding the beauty covers in. And I do have to start removing that serpentine belt tensioner because it is blocking a lot of the leaks from behind it, and I want to make sure that it's coming from the power steering reservoir. The serpentine belt tensioner is held in by 2 bolts, but you do have to release the tension of it to remove the serpentine belt out of the way before you do take those bolts out. But it's a very easy job and it takes about 5 minutes to do. So I've changed the gasket that is located right behind this bolt right here. And it does look a bit wet, but it also could be leaking from the power steering reservoir. So I'm not quite sure if that is the oil leak or the power steering pump, but for now I'm going to tighten that bolt up a little bit tighter and then change the power steering reservoir O-ring like I planned. The only way of removing the C-clamp from the power steering reservoir is by putting a screwdriver through the small slot and sliding the C-clamp out. Then there's 3 bolts holding it in and the whole entire pump just slides out. And this is the O-ring that I'm planning on changing. Before changing, we do have to do a good job cleaning everything up. Then it's just the reverse order of putting everything back together again, but I wish it was that easy. All right, I have no success of putting the C-clamp in. Just so you guys know, that is the C-clamp I'm talking about. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right there. I'm trying to push the C-clamp back into the reservoir. C-clamp is so tight and there's no space. I have no power to actually do it. And I can't even fit any tools in it. I saw some people buy special tools to actually put the clamp in, but I'm not spending 30 bucks just to put a clamp in. I gotta figure out a new way. And I think what's gonna save the day is one of these sockets. My plan with the socket is to put it against the C-clamp and then use like a big screwdriver to wedge the socket into the C-clamp so it pushes it freely. I don't have the strength to push it manually with my hands because it's really strong and it's really sharp. So I'm gonna try doing that and see if it works out. I wish I knew how much trouble this power steering reservoir O-ring would give me before starting the job, but now you guys know. I definitely thought I had a very good plan when putting the C-clamp back in, but I ran into a few complications. It seems like this hose is in the way of actually fitting the socket into right beside the clamp. So I'm gonna take this out again and then take the hose out. And once I take this out, I can put the socket right here and then it'll hopefully fit through. I thought I was a genius when I came up with a way of putting that C-clamp back in, but I still couldn't get it in even with different types of tools. I then even tried using a crowbar, but it was putting way too much pressure on the ABS pump when I was trying to pry it. And then, unfortunately, I heard a click that I wish I never heard. The plastic ring at the edge of the reservoir just snapped in half because I was pushing the clip into the pump really aggressively. Unfortunately, things like these are going to happen. It's okay. I already bought a brand new part. It's going to be here in a couple of days. So that's when we're going to finish up the car. It's just a bit of annoying because now I don't really have a car, but that's okay. We're going to learn from this mistake and just move forward. Plus, I am a rookie at this, so things like that are going to happen when I'm learning. It doesn't mean that we can't be productive with the other things that we got to work on the car. I still have a transmission service to do and a few little cosmetic things around the car. So while we're waiting for this part, I'm just going to work on the transmission and get some other things going. So it's okay. Hopefully this is a good learner for you guys as well. Definitely was for me. If something is not going into a plastic part, probably don't need to use a crowbar and force something in. Probably just need to find a better way of doing it. So this is something that I'm going to do. And maybe I did need to buy the $30 tool. I definitely regret not getting that now, but it's okay. Yep, that was definitely a rookie mistake, and I've definitely learned from that one. For now, we're going to take the rear wiper blade arm off because it's actually cracked right in that middle part right there. And once again, I got another complication. The metal part got simply stuck, but it's nothing that a fire can't deal with. Make sure when hitting up the area, you're not really touching the glass because it can crack through the middle of it. And the best way I found dealing with it is actually by spinning the nut into it a bit further and then splitting it when it cracks in half. Now we can give that area a little bit of a clean before putting a new one in. And then obviously I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize on it because the next person might struggle with this. So it'll be a little bit easier to take it off. We'll put the old Viper back on and voila, it's complete. All right, now it's time to change the front headlights off, the low beams one specifically. Apparently, people usually take the front bumper off and then take the headlight out and then change the low beam. I'm not doing that. I think I could do it much quicker than that. So I'm either about to shock the world of how fast I actually changed the light, or I'm gonna take the bumper out and see how that works out. I firstly started by removing the cam by spinning it clockwise and then just putting it aside for now. We can then simply just spin off the light and it will come up with ease. You're going to replace the old low beam with a Philips H7. Apparently these are OEM and they're the same but a fraction of the price. Before installing, I want to make sure that the light actually works, and voila, it does. And now it's finally ready to be put inside the headlight. The only thing you have to do is put it in, spin it in place, and then there's a clip from the top that simply pushes in and holds the light in place. But I once again ran into another issue. Alright, seems like I figured out why people take the bumper off. I accidentally pulled on the clip way too hard and it completely slipped out of the slot, and there's no way I can feel my way through putting the clip back on. So I am going to try taking the front fender off and then just peeking my head through it because I'll have visibility towards the low beam section, and I'll try putting this back in with the light. See if that works out. I don't want to take the bumper off. The front fender inner lining is held on by a few screws and a few little tabs that you just have to pull out with a screwdriver. It's a pretty simple process and takes very quickly. You can even do it with the wheel on, as you guys can see. And now we have all of the access in the world towards that headlight, and we can actually just see everything. It does make it a bit easier if you do turn the wheel a little bit so you can fit your head a little bit, but if you don't want to, I think you can still fit your head in. My head is pretty big, but it still fits. I finally managed to put the clip in. It has to be held on from the bottom into just these tabs, and at the very top there's these tabs that you have to put it in. And then once you fit the light in, you can slide that clip down. And now let's test and make sure that it actually works. Alright, that'll be it for today. I'm gonna come back tomorrow and finish up the rest of the car. It is already 11 o'clock and today's actually my birthday, so I'm gonna go celebrate now. But I'll be back tomorrow to finish it up. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna get this video done this week, but that's okay. I'll get it done as soon as I possibly can. See you guys tomorrow. It is finally time to change the front cracked windshield of mine. My new friends from Boulevard Auto Glass came straight to my garage and started removing the windshield right away. We then have to replace the putty at the very top once the windshield is removed, so then a new one can be popped on. The guys here did an excellent job. It was super precise and the price was actually really affordable. Wait until the end of the video to find out how much I've been spending on this car during this video. And now it's time for the hail damage of the car. I did make a phone call to see how much it would take to fix it. Yeah, it's a code C359. $1,700? Okay, thank you for your time. Bye. I then luckily found a GLK that was crash damaged from the rear and the hood was not damaged, and it's the exact same color as mine. So I definitely rushed there and bought the hood. I got another O-ring, a new clip, and a reservoir. I think I figured out why I broke the power steering reservoir the last time, and that's because I didn't fully attach it to the power steering pump. So it was constantly moving back and forth while I was trying to put the clip in, and this part unfortunately snapped. So my new plan is to put it in fully, bolt it on so this part cannot move anymore, and then slide the pin in, and I think that should work. Let's try it out. I am now praying to God that I do not have to buy another power steering reservoir. I then have reattached all of the hoses, put the new bolts in, and then tried pushing that C-clamp back in. Oh! Oh my God! I just clipped it on by hand! What? I swear to God, I couldn't clip it on by hand for the last one. Let's make sure we actually clipped it on. So as you guys just have seen, I guess it's in. I don't know why it didn't work last time and I had to use a crowbar for it, but I'm just happy that it worked out. All right, now let's put that power steering reservoir hose back on, and I bought brand new hose clamps for it. Unfortunately, I should have thought about this earlier, but the old clip went through a lot of heat cycles. And because of that, it became very brittle, which made it less malleable and not able to bend it into place, which is why the new one popped in so easily. It's time to pour in some of the power steering fluid that we did lose through the last job. This power steering fluid is really expensive, so make sure to not spill any. And now is finally time to put the car back together and start it and begin the bleeding process. Verify that there's no leaks before starting the car and make sure you do fill it up to the very top. Right now it's the maximum cold level that it can get to. We can then start turning the wheel left and right by then bleeding the fluid, and make sure you do double check for any leaks. Now we can start moving on to the transmission service. There's obviously another beauty pan that is going to be covering the transmission, which is held on by about 8 bolts. So once we remove that, we'll have all the access to the transmission pan. We can then loosen up the bolts and start draining the transmission fluid. The car manufacturers do say that the transmission fluid is lifetime now. Please don't believe them and change the fluid. There is another tube that you have to loosen up from the inside of the pan with a screwdriver, and then the remaining of the fluid will start pouring out. Now we can take all the 6 pan bolts out of the way, and you can use some penetrating fluid on those bolts. So it seems like for me to remove this bolt right here, I gotta take this bracket out, which is held on by a screw right here, and another one back there. So once I take them out, I should be able to move this out of the way and then get to that bolt. This job can literally save you thousands if you do it yourself. Unfortunately, it's just a little messy if you're not patient. But take your time with it and make sure you are prepared for any leaks that might come out. Right now I'm taking all of the pan bolts out of the way, and when I do loosen up the pan fully, more fluid will come out, but I am prepared. This will unveil the transmission fluid filter and the valve body, and now we can remove that filter. It is very important to clean the pan once you do take it out and remove that gasket. If you do not clean it up, a lot of the dirt from the transmission does get stuck on the magnets and at the bottom of the pan, so make sure you do a good job cleaning it. The gasket is rubber, and when it gets heated up and cooled off, it becomes really brittle and can crack, so make sure you do buy a new one and do replace it. And these pan bolts do get worn out after each time, so get some new ones with the kit. To prevent any leaks, make sure you do a good job of cleaning the surface as well, because that's where the gasket is going to be sitting against. With the kit, I got a brand new filter, so make sure you do put a new one on, and once it goes in, it will make a click. Now we can start going in the reverse order and putting everything back together. I do secure the pan with 2 bolts once I put it in before torquing them to correct spec. These bolts require like 8 Newton meters of torque, so once they are tight, I do a 90-degree to 180-degree turn after that, and that's when I know that they're tight. Alright, it's finally time to put the transmission fluid in. I needed to buy this tool right here to pump the transmission fluid inside the transmission, because the only way to do it is from underneath the car. And because I didn't do the torque converter, I'm going to put 4 liters of transmission fluid into the pan first, start the car, get it up to temperature, because I need to check the fluid when it's at 45 degrees Celsius. While the car is warming up, I'm going to add another liter of fluid into the pan, and then right when it hits that temperature, I'm going to drain the remaining of the fluid that it doesn't need in the car. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense, but that's the general procedure of doing it. So it seems like the capacity of this thing is only 3 liters. So I'm going to pump 3 liters and then we'll put in 2 liters while the car is warming up. There's an adapter that comes with the transmission pump kit, so we can simply just put it on the bolt and then quick release into that adapter. So it has sucked up all 3 liters of fluid. Now we're going to start the car and wait until the transmission is at about 45 degrees Celsius. And the way we're going to verify that is by using a car lead. So we're going to plug it in, start the car, and then pump 2 liters while the car is warming up. Alright, I've just pumped in the 2 liters of fluid that is remaining. While that's warming up, I'm also going to go through all of the gears and make sure that the fluid is kind of circulating all around the transmission, because I think that will help speed up the process too. After I drained the unwanted fluid that I put extra in, I can finally clean up the area and we're done. It's definitely a good feeling when I almost finished all the mechanical parts of the car. I just have to put this inner lining back into the car and then start taking a look at that hail damaged hood. To remove the previous hood, there's the shock that I have to remove, and then there's 2 bolts at the hinges that you have to take off, one at the bottom and one at the top. And it's the exact same procedure on the other side. The hood is very heavy, so I did ask Elisa to help me out with one side while we do remove the hood. Lining up with the hinges is definitely tough, but me and Elisa did manage to do it together. Thank you, Elisa. I can now put the bolts in, put the shocks in, and we're done. All right, and to end the video off, I'm gonna do a full price breakdown of everything we've done in this video as always. This one really hurt my bank account. Firstly, we had to buy another O-ring and the power steering reservoir. Both of those things costed $73.06. Now we bought those light bulbs. Both of the bulbs were $33.16. Then we had to buy the hood, which was the big one for me. It was $800. The windshield was $309.70. And lastly, we had to buy a few hose clamps for the power steering reservoir. And those clamps were $5.24. Our new total is $10,790.98. We are definitely getting close to the market value of the car, so we cannot be spending a lot more than this. And my plan all along was to sell it at the end of the road, but the car is still not perfect. There's a few little things that we have to get done cosmetically to make this car look really good on Facebook Marketplace so we can get more people to come and check it out. In this video, we're going to finish all of those little things, finally put it up on the market, and hopefully you can sell quick. I hope. So it's been 2.5 months. So let's get started on a few of those little things, and we're gonna start with the cabin air filters. This is probably one of the most neglected jobs that ever gets done on a car. The easiest jobs ever, it's super cheap, and the air in the car is just so much better, so change your air filter, guys. Air filter is located right underneath there. It's located behind the panel that is secured with a few little screws. Once you remove the screws, you'll have access to it, and you can simply just slide it out just like that. And this is the old one. It's actually not awful, but it's definitely a few years old. And this is the one I bought. I actually bought a charcoal cleanser one, which should clean out the air a little bit better. And putting it back in is the exact same way as you took it out, just in the reverse order. And obviously you can't post a car on Facebook Marketplace without giving it a good wash. The paint of the car is something that always attracted me. It looks blue in the dark, but it looks purple with the sun shining on it. These rims look so much better when I clean them up, but these hubcaps do not make it look good. So I bought some new ones from AliExpress. Honestly, this is my first ever time buying something from AliExpress because I was always skeptical about their quality. But this is really good quality, and it has like a nice cover and everything, so I only paid $13 for these, so this is a good upgrade for these. Preferably do not use screwdrivers for something like this because you can't scratch up the rims. Now we're gonna work on the license plate lighting. It's yellow right now, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I like blue much better, so let's change those up. Speaking of lighting, I don't know about you guys, but I always find it really difficult to find headlights or internal lights or any other lights for a car. And I'm personally really tired of not being able to see anything down the road, especially in the middle of the night. But there's one brand that fixes all of those issues, and that brand is Oxedo. Oxedo doesn't only sell front headlights, they sell all the interior lights, side lights, even side markers for any car or truck you have. And their lights are not just OEM lights. They last longer, they're brighter, and they install the exact same way as an OEM light, which is better. And the beauty about Oxedo is that they don't only sell lights, they sell a bunch of other things like car chargers, flashlights, and many other things on their website. And their website is so intuitive. You pick out the category that you want, the year, the make, and the model of the vehicle, and what type of light that you want, and it will show you all of the options they have. Because Christmas is right around the corner, they provided you guys a 15% off if you guys use the code AUTO15, or just click the link down in the description below. So if you guys want some excellent headlights or any types of other things for an excellent price with a 15% off, go down to the website below. They currently have a bunch of Christmas deals as well that you guys will definitely find attractive. Thanks, Oxedo. Oh, that looks so much better. It's such an easy upgrade. This literally took me 30 seconds. And you can probably up the price of the car by $50. So easy, cheap upgrade. Before we proceed with putting it up on the market, let's go and check out how much money we've actually put into this car. It's a lot more than I thought it would be. All right, the only thing that we did in this video were the hubcaps, paint, seat cover, and the lights. So let's add those to the tally. The total comes out to be $10,974.39, which I think is still pretty good. Unfortunately, I didn't have time left to fully polish the car like I wanted to and actually provide it ceramic coating, but this will do. It will also protect the paint a little bit and make it look nicer in photos. And we're fully done the car. It's perfect. Let's take it on a test drive. Oh, this car feels so good now. Wow, it's like brand new. Guys, when I say that this car literally feels like brand new and it drives like new, it's because I feel it. Changing those engine mounts and transmission mounts changes the whole entire dynamic of the car. The car no longer shakes when it's idling, when you're at a stoplight. The brakes feel absolutely incredible. And there's no more squeaking coming from the engine because we changed the serpentine belt and we fixed all of the leaks. And I know that a lot of people say that this is simply a C350, just an SUV version of it, and I honestly don't see anything wrong with that. This car is really comfortable. The C350s are super reliable. They're pretty quick too, and you still get all of the Mercedes comfort features. But an SUV form with a 4MATIC and you're higher off the ground, what don't you like about that? Now, even though this car gave me a lot of problems, fixing this was not easy, especially in 2010. It seems like the newer the cars get, the less DIY they become. Because on my 2003 S-Class, honestly, that is a little bit easier to work on than this. Minus the rust, obviously. And the comfort of the long drives is absolutely immeasurable with any other car. And this car doesn't even have air suspension. It's on springs, which makes it actually a little bit more reliable, because I know some people definitely hate air suspension on the cars, especially for long trips. And I was always under the assumption that there's nothing better than air suspension, but honestly, this car on springs proved me wrong. Now, you guys might be asking, what is my next step with this car? And my next step is simple. I'm going to sell it. I'm actually moving to Vancouver tomorrow, and I am selling this car in Calgary, and the winters here are really bad. We get 40 centimeters of snow, and this car performed excellently in the winter, so I don't think I'm going to have too much trouble selling it. So it's been 2.5 months since I put this car up for sale. I've had about 2 people come and check out the car, and unfortunately I have it priced way too high. When I bought this car, which was about 6 to 7 months ago, the car market was actually really good for these. I could have sold this for about $14,000. During the time of me fixing all of these items and actually enjoying the car, these cars kind of plummeted and they're below $10,000 now. It's a little below from what I've put into this car, which I don't really want to sell it for that low. But it's actually already October and I have moved to Vancouver, and this car has been in Calgary for the past 2 months trying to sell. And I think I found a buyer in Vancouver. So let me tell you what happened while we drive over there. Once I had a lead, I booked my first flight to Calgary to go and pick up the car. This car rides so well, I don't even want to get rid of it. I know that the point of me driving it to Vancouver from Calgary is to sell it, but I absolutely love the way it drives, and all the fixes that I've done for it, it just drives flawlessly. We have made it halfway throughout the trip, and there is absolutely no problems with the car. It runs flawlessly, and it's actually really good on fuel. I'm getting 10.5 liters 100 kilometers, which for this type of SUV with a car full of things, I think it's actually really good. There is one catcher though. Because this car is actually registered in Alberta, which is in another province in Canada for the people that are in the US or the UK, I am driving this to another province, which is the British Columbia province, and that person needs to get an out-of-province inspection for the car to make sure that it's safe on the roads. I don't think there's going to be any issues with passing the out-of-province inspection, but they might find a few little things that I potentially missed, like suspension components, and before I could actually pass that inspection, I will need to fix everything before I can actually fulfill the sale of the car. So I'm taking a little bit of risk on myself on actually driving this all the way from Calgary to Vancouver, and I told them that I'm confident that this car will pass the out-of-province inspection, but we do have a contract that states, hey, if there's any problem with the car, he's going to take care of all the parts and I'm just going to do all the work for him. So I still think it's a really good deal. Now you guys are all up to speed. Let's drive this car to Vancouver and I will see you guys there. And as I said earlier, this drive was absolutely perfect. It was one of the most beautiful drives I've ever driven in my life. And the car was driving so smooth, I can barely even feel the speed. And that was my biggest problem. and I instantly started to pull over and brake, and that's when I realized how fast I was actually going. And let's just say it was way above the speed limit.
Morning.
Hello, how are you?
Not too bad, just a little quick there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my apologies.
Do you have your driver's license handy yet?
Yes.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Vancouver. I'm actually moving there. I'm
Okay.
a student. I go to UBC.
Nice.
Yeah.
Alright, do you have your insurance and stuff there?
Yeah. Here's
Somewhere?
here's my registration,
Yeah, that's good
and
for now.
my insurance is in the. I have a photo of it if you want.
Yeah, for sure. See if
Yeah,
you can pull it for me. I'll
sure.
be right back, okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Sign it. Appreciate it. Awesome, good till 19th there.
This is just the temporary one. I'm waiting for the permanent one to go in the mail. Yeah,
Sounds good.
thank you. I just insured it.
Just the ticket for the speed here though, okay? So how this works is you'll have until November 7th.
Okay.
There's just a website and a QR code on the bottom. It kind of just goes over some options on how you can deal with it, alright?
Okay.
But it is only 90 through the park here, so just try to slow down a little bit, okay?
Thank you so much,
Okay,
will
take
do.
care.
I unfortunately did end up getting a ticket, but I didn't get towed, which is really important too, and I got the price of the ticket reduced when I went to court, which was really nice as well. And we have arrived to Vancouver. The car passed the outer province inspection, and it's officially a BC car, and it was time to say our goodbyes. Time for a new project.